Imagine two people with the same goal, making their first $1 million. The first person works 80-hour weeks for years, sacrificing health and relationships, only to find themselves still struggling to break six figures. The second person, starting with similar resources and abilities, reaches that $1 million milestone in just 18 months, working fewer hours and with remarkably less stress. What's the difference between them? It's not luck, it's not connections, it's not even raw intelligence or willpower. It's something far more fundamental, yet consistently overlooked by nearly everyone chasing wealth. What if I told you that in every system tied to wealth creation, whether it's business models, investment strategies, market dynamics, or even personal productivity, there exist precise pressure points? What if the difference between grinding for decades and achieving financial freedom rapidly isn't how hard you work, but whether you're applying your effort at the exact right place? Consider this. Why do some entrepreneurs build million-dollar businesses in 2 years, while others remain stuck at $100,000 in revenue after a decade of exhausting work? Why do certain investors consistently multiply their capital during market conditions that bankrupt others? What hidden understanding separates those who efficiently generate wealth from those perpetually trapped in the hamster wheel of trading time for money? The answer lies in what I call the leverage mindset, a fundamental shift in how you perceive financial opportunities that will transform your path to that first $1 million and beyond. But here's what's fascinating. This isn't about working harder or even smarter in the conventional sense. It's about developing an entirely different way of seeing systems and identifying their critical vulnerability points, the places where a small push creates massive financial returns. The principles I'm about to share have helped ordinary people with average resources create extraordinary wealth in compressed timeframes. They've enabled countless individuals to bypass years, even decades, of financial struggle by focusing their efforts precisely where they matter most. Yet these principles remain largely unknown or misunderstood by most people chasing financial success. But I must warn you, there's a reason these wealth-building approaches aren't commonly taught. They challenge our most basic assumptions about money, effort, and achievement. They require us to abandon comfortable but ineffective patterns of financial thinking. And they demand a level of strategic patience that runs counter to our culture's obsession with get-rich-quick schemes and hustle culture. The question becomes, are you ready to see the path to $1 million through this different lens, to develop the ability to identify the precise fulcrum points where minimal financial pressure creates maximum monetary gain? Because once you understand these principles, you'll never approach wealth creation the same way again. To truly understand the leverage mindset, we must first turn to one of history's most brilliant strategic thinkers, Archimedes of Syracuse. In the 3rd century BCE, this Greek mathematician and inventor made a statement that would forever change how we understand the mechanics of influence. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. This wasn't mere poetic flourish. Archimedes had discovered the fundamental principle of mechanical advantage, that with the right positioning and application of force, even the smallest effort could produce extraordinary results. What most people miss is that this principle extends far beyond the physical world. Consider how this same concept was later applied by Sun Tzu in The Art of War, where he emphasized attacking the enemy's strategy rather than their forces, finding the leverage point that collapses resistance without direct confrontation. The supreme art of war, he wrote, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This is leverage in its purest form. But perhaps no one understood systemic leverage better than John D. Rockefeller, who built the greatest fortune in modern history, not through brute force, but through identifying the critical pressure points in the emerging oil industry. While Others focused on drilling for oil, the most visible but highly competitive and unpredictable aspect. Rockefeller recognized that controlling the refining and distribution networks represented the true leverage points. With this insight, he built Standard Oil and amassed wealth equivalent to approximately $400 billion in today's currency. What's fascinating is how few people understood Rockefeller's approach at the time. His competitors consistently misattributed his success to ruthlessness or luck, missing the fundamental principle at work. He wasn't working harder, he was applying force at precisely the right point in the system. This pattern repeats throughout history. Consider how Jeff Bezos identified a critical leverage point in retail, the elimination of physical stores, and built Amazon into a trillion-dollar company, or how Ray Dalio created unprecedented wealth by recognizing leverage points in market systems that others couldn't see, developing what he called principles to systematically identify these opportunities. But here's where most people get confused about leverage. They mistake it for simple shortcuts or tricks. True leverage isn't about cutting corners. It's about understanding systems so deeply that you can identify their fundamental pressure points. It's not a tactic, it's a completely different way of seeing. Modern systems theorist Donella Meadows formalized this thinking in her groundbreaking work on leverage points, places within complex systems where small shifts produce big changes. She discovered something remarkable. The most powerful leverage points are rarely the most obvious, and they're almost never where most people focus their attention. This brings us to the critical question that will transform your financial journey. What if the path to your first $1 million isn't about working harder, networking more aggressively, or even developing new skills, though these all have their place? What if it's primarily about developing the ability to see leverage points that others miss? The wealthy elite understand this intuitively. They're not necessarily smarter or harder working than everyone else, though many certainly are, but they consistently demonstrate an uncanny ability to identify where minimal input creates maximum output. They instinctively focus on the critical 4% of actions that create 96% of the results, while most people do the opposite. But here's what you might be wondering. If this approach is so effective, why isn't everyone using it? Why do most people, even highly educated, motivated individuals, continue pushing boulders uphill when levered approaches exist? And most importantly, can this mindset be learned, or is it something you either have or don't? To answer these questions, we need to dive deeper into the psychology that prevents most people from adopting the leverage mindset, and the specific framework that allows you to consistently identify these critical pressure points in any wealth-building system. The reason most people never develop the leverage mindset is deceptively simple. We're biologically wired against it. Our evolutionary programming pushes us toward direct action, visible effort, and linear thinking, all of which actively work against finding true leverage points. Think about it. For thousands of years, human survival depended on direct cause and effect relationships. If you wanted food, you hunted or gathered. If you wanted shelter, you built it. This direct relationship between effort and reward became deeply embedded in our psychology. We intuitively believe that more input should equal more output, a mental model that serves us well in simple systems but fails catastrophically in complex ones. Modern financial and business systems, however, are fundamentally non-linear. They contain feedback loops, amplification mechanisms, and counterintuitive behaviors that make direct approaches not just inefficient, but often counterproductive. Let me make this concrete with a simple example. Two entrepreneurs launch similar businesses. The first follows conventional wisdom, works tirelessly to perfect their product, builds a comprehensive business plan, and gradually scales their marketing efforts. The second takes a radically different approach, rapidly tests minimum viable products, identifies the single customer acquisition channel with the lowest cost and highest return, then focuses exclusively on optimizing that channel before addressing anything else. After 1 year, the first entrepreneur has created a superior product but struggles with high customer acquisition costs and limited revenue. The second has built a less refined product but has established a cash flow positive business with exponential growth potential. The difference? The second entrepreneur identified the critical leverage point in their system, the most efficient customer acquisition channel, and applied disproportionate force there instead of spreading their efforts evenly. This illustrates the first key principle of the leverage mindset. Uneven force distribution creates exponential results. Most people instinctively distribute their efforts relatively evenly across different aspects of their goals. Those with the leverage mindset do the opposite. They apply 80% of their resources to the critical 20%, or often 95% to the vital 5%, where leverage exists. But how do you identify these leverage points? This brings us to the second principle. Systems mapping reveals hidden pressure points. Before taking action, those with the leverage mindset invest time understanding the entire system they're operating within. They ask questions like, what are the components of this system? How do these components interact? Where do resources accumulate or deplete? What controls the flow of value? Where do constraints or bottlenecks exist? Consider how Warren Buffett approaches investment. While most investors analyze countless metrics about individual companies, Buffett focuses obsessively on identifying businesses with sustainable competitive advantages, what he calls moats. He recognized early that this single factor represents the primary leverage point in long-term investment success. By filtering for this one critical quality before considering anything else, he created unprecedented wealth. The third principle builds on this. Inflection points offer maximum leverage. Systems don't change uniformly over time. They have critical thresholds where small inputs can trigger state changes. Those with the leverage mindset actively look for these inflection points. Think about how the early investors in Bitcoin created enormous wealth. They recognized that cryptocurrency represented a potential inflection point in the financial system, a moment where small positions could create extraordinary returns if a systemic shift occurred. While the technology itself was important, the true leverage came from recognizing the inflection point and positioning accordingly. But perhaps the most counterintuitive principle is the fourth. Indirect approaches yield direct results. When everyone attacks a problem directly, the competition is fierce and returns diminish. The leverage mindset looks for second-order effects and indirect approaches. Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and Palantir, exemplifies this principle. When building PayPal, instead of directly competing for merchants like traditional payment processors, the company created a peer-to-peer system that grew virally among eBay users. This indirect approach allowed them to establish dominant market position before pivoting to merchant services, bypassing years of direct competition. This brings us to a crucial insight. The most powerful leverage points in any system are often hidden in plain sight, obscured not by their complexity, but by our conditioned blindness to them. They're the opportunities everyone sees but misinterprets, the strategies that seem counterintuitive until their power becomes undeniable. To develop this perception, you must first unlearn conventional approaches to achieving wealth. Most financial advice focuses on incremental improvements, saving a bit more, investing a bit more wisely, working a bit harder. But this advice, while not wrong, addresses the least powerful leverage points in the system. Consider the hierarchy of financial leverage points. Level 1, low leverage, efficiency, working more hours, cutting expenses, optimizing existing processes. Most people never move beyond this level. Level 2, medium leverage, scalability, building systems that multiply effort, creating passive income streams, developing intellectual property. Most successful professionals reach this level. Level 3, high leverage, positioning, controlling critical nodes in value networks, creating or arbitraging market asymmetries, engineering positive network effects. Most millionaires operate here. Level 4, extraordinary leverage, system design, creating new games rather than winning existing ones, designing self-reinforcing feedback loops, building platforms that appreciate with use. Billionaires consistently leverage these points. The key question becomes, how do you quickly identify which leverage points are accessible in your specific circumstances? How do you develop the perception to see these opportunities where others miss them? This brings us to a framework I call the leverage quadrant, a systematic approach to identifying the highest yield pressure points in any wealth building system. But before I reveal this framework, we need to confront an uncomfortable truth. The greatest obstacle to developing the leverage mindset isn't external. It's the deeply ingrained psychological patterns that prevent us from seeing and acting on leverage points, even when they're right in front of us. These mental blocks, what I call leverage blindness, manifest in predictable ways. Understanding them is the first step toward overcoming them. But here's the question we need to explore next. What specific psychological barriers prevent most people from seeing and acting on high leverage opportunities, even when they're staring right at them? Let me ask you a direct question. How many genuine leverage points have you walked past in your life without recognizing them? How many opportunities for creating substantial wealth slipped through your fingers, not because you lacked the capability, but because you lacked the perception to see them for what they were? If you're like most people, the answer is many, and it's not your fault. You've been conditioned your entire life to miss leverage points. From your earliest education, you were taught that rewards come from direct effort. Study hard, get good grades. Work hard, get promotions. Save diligently, build wealth slowly. This linear, direct effort mindset is so deeply ingrained that it functions like an immune system, actively rejecting leverage-based thinking as somehow cheating or too good to be true. I can hear the objections forming in your mind right now. If it were that easy, everyone would do it. There must be a catch. I don't have special connections or advantages. Those opportunities only exist for people already wealthy. These are the exact thought patterns that keep the leverage mindset perpetually out of reach for most people. They're the antibodies your mental immune system produces when confronted with ideas that contradict your conditioning. Let me confront these directly. First, leverage points are not easy to exploit. They require deep systematic understanding, strategic patience, and often counterintuitive action. That's precisely why everyone doesn't do it. Leverage isn't about effort reduction. It's about impact multiplication. Second, the catch isn't hidden. It's that you must invest heavily in developing perception before action. While others rush to do, those with the leverage mindset invest disproportionately in seeing. This front-loaded investment in understanding systems deters most people who want immediate activity and visible progress. Third, you don't need special connections or advantages to start. You need special perception. Many of the wealthiest individuals started with ordinary circumstances, but extraordinary ways of seeing opportunity. Their connections and advantages came as results, not prerequisites. Finally, these opportunities don't only exist for the already wealthy, but they do exist primarily for the already perceptive. Capital is an accelerant to leverage, not a requirement for it. If you feel a resistance to these ideas, a voice insisting that creating substantial wealth can't be as straightforward as identifying and exploiting leverage points, I want you to recognize something profound. That resistance itself is the primary obstacle between you and your financial goals. I've worked with thousands of individuals across the wealth spectrum, from those struggling with debt to nine-figure entrepreneurs. The consistent pattern I've observed is that financial outcomes correlate more strongly with leverage perception than with nearly any other factor, including intelligence, education, initial capital, or even work ethic. What's fascinating is that once you develop this perception, leverage points appear everywhere. It's like putting on glasses after a lifetime of blurred vision. Suddenly, opportunities that were always present become crystal clear. But here's the difficult truth you must confront. If you continue approaching wealth creation through direct effort and linear thinking, you're choosing the hardest possible path. You're deciding to push the boulder uphill when leverage points exist that could move it with a fraction of the effort. Let me illustrate this with a personal example that might resonate with your own experience. Early in my career, I was working 70-hour weeks building a consulting business. I was smart, dedicated, and produced excellent work. Yet after 3 years, I still struggled to break six figures. My focus was entirely on doing my work better, faster, and for more hours, a classic low-leverage approach. The breakthrough came when I realized I was optimizing the wrong variable entirely. The critical leverage point wasn't my productive output. It was how I positioned my expertise in the market. By restructuring my offering from hourly consulting to problem-specific solutions for a narrow industry segment, I tripled my income within 6 months while working fewer hours. The work itself barely changed, but by applying force at the proper leverage point, positioning rather than production, the results transformed entirely. The same effort yielded radically different outcomes. Now, here's where most people get stuck. They intellectually understand the concept of leverage, but emotionally remain committed to direct effort approaches. They nod along with these ideas, then return to pushing their boulders uphill, vaguely hoping to stumble upon shortcuts. This gap between intellectual understanding and emotional commitment is what separates those who transform their financial reality from those who merely wish it would change. Bridging this gap requires more than information. It requires a fundamental identity shift. You must begin seeing yourself not as a worker who occasionally finds leverage, but as a leverage seeker who occasionally works. This identity shift changes everything. The opportunities you notice, the questions you ask, the actions you prioritize, and ultimately, the wealth you create. So I'll ask you again, how many leverage points are you walking past right now? In your current business, career, investments, or personal skills, where are the pressure points that could multiply your financial outcomes with the same or less effort than you're currently expending? The answer will determine whether you reach your first $1 million in 18 months or 18 years. And the framework I'm about to share will help you identify these points with systematic precision. But first, you must make a decision. Are you willing to temporarily suspend your conditioning, to set aside the mental models that have governed your approach to wealth creation thus far? Because without this willingness, what follows will be merely interesting rather than transformative. The choice is yours, and it represents perhaps the most important leverage point of all. Now that you've confronted the psychological barriers to leverage thinking, let me share the framework that will transform how you identify and exploit critical pressure points in any system, the leverage quadrant. This framework categorizes potential leverage points along two key dimensions: visibility, how obvious the opportunity is to most people, and accessibility, how easily you can exploit it given your current resources. By mapping opportunities against these dimensions, you can quickly identify where to focus your limited time, attention, and resources for maximum financial impact. The quadrant works like this. Quadrant 1, visible and accessible. These are leverage points that most people can see and exploit. Think obvious business opportunities, popular investment trends, or common career advantages. While they offer some leverage, The competition is fierce, diminishing their power. These rarely create substantial wealth because their very visibility attracts crowds that dilute returns. Quadrant 2. Visible and inaccessible. These leverage points are widely recognized but difficult for most to access, like prime real estate investments, high-barrier industries, or opportunities requiring substantial initial capital. Many people waste years fixating on these, drawn by their visibility but frustrated by their inaccessibility. Quadrant 3. Invisible and inaccessible. These points offer tremendous leverage but remain both hidden and difficult to access with your current resources. They become relevant only as your perception and capabilities grow. Recognizing them is useful primarily for long-term positioning rather than immediate action. Quadrant 4. Invisible and accessible. This is the sweet spot. High leverage opportunities that most people don't see, but that you can actually exploit with your current resources. These invisible yet accessible pressure points create the most rapid wealth accumulation because they combine high potential returns with minimal competition. The million-dollar insight is this: most people spend their lives in quadrants 1 and 2, fighting fierce competition or barriers they can't overcome. Those who create substantial wealth quickly focus almost exclusively on quadrant 4, invisible opportunities that are nonetheless accessible to them specifically. How do you identify these quadrant 4 opportunities? By systematically examining the intersection of 3 elements. Your unique perception advantages. What systems do you understand deeply that most others don't? Your distinctive capabilities. What can you execute efficiently that others find difficult? Market inefficiencies. Where are resources or value mispriced in systems you interact with? When these 3 elements overlap, you've found a quadrant 4 opportunity, a leverage point most people can't see that you're uniquely positioned to exploit. For example, in 2010, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia recognized that millions of people had spare bedrooms while hotel rooms remained expensive and often scarce. While this observation was theoretically available to anyone, their unique backgrounds in design allowed them to see that the trust barrier, not the concept itself, was the critical leverage point in making home sharing viable. By focusing disproportionate effort on creating trust mechanisms rather than inventory acquisition, they built Airbnb into a multi-billion-dollar company. The room-sharing concept resided in quadrant 1, visible and accessible to many, but the trust design leverage point existed in quadrant 4, invisible to most, but accessible to them specifically. This pattern repeats across virtually all cases of rapid wealth creation. The individuals didn't necessarily work harder than everyone else. They identified leverage points in quadrant 4 and applied disproportionate force there. Here's the profound insight that will transform your approach to creating wealth. Your path to $1 million doesn't lie in pushing harder against visible obstacles. It lies in systematically training yourself to see the invisible leverage points that already exist within systems you interact with daily. These points are hiding in plain sight, in market inefficiencies, information asymmetries, emerging inflection points, and undervalued assets, both tangible and intangible. They exist in your career, business, investments, and personal capabilities. But until you develop the perception to see them, they might as well not exist at all. So here's my challenge to you. After watching this video, identify one system you participate in regularly, whether professional, financial, or personal, and apply the leverage quadrant analysis. Map out the potential pressure points across all 4 quadrants, then focus exclusively on those in quadrant 4. If you've truly grasped the power of the leverage mindset, comment below with, "I see the invisible points," so I know you've reached this critical juncture in understanding. Those who do this exercise with genuine curiosity almost invariably discover leverage opportunities they've been overlooking, often for years. As we conclude this exploration of the leverage mindset, remember that what we've discussed isn't just a strategy. It's a fundamental shift in how you perceive and interact with the systems that govern wealth creation. This perception shift is what separates those who struggle financially from those who generate extraordinary returns with seemingly ordinary resources. The journey to your first $1 million and beyond begins not with harder work, but with developing the ability to see what others miss, to identify those critical pressure points where minimal input creates maximum output, to recognize when the game you're playing offers poor leverage, and to have the courage to change games entirely. What makes this approach so powerful is that it compounds over time. Each leverage point you successfully identify and exploit not only creates immediate returns, but enhances your ability to perceive future opportunities. Your leverage perception becomes increasingly refined, allowing you to spot increasingly powerful pressure points that remain invisible to most. This compounding perception advantage explains why wealth creation often accelerates dramatically after the first million. It's not just the capital that compounds, it's the leverage mindset itself. So where do you go from here? How do you systematically develop this perception and apply it to your specific circumstances? That's precisely what I'll be exploring in the next video in this series, where I'll break down the specific techniques for identifying Quadrant 4 opportunities in different domains: business, investing, careers, and personal skill development. I'll share concrete examples of how ordinary individuals have used these techniques to create extraordinary wealth in compressed timeframes, and provide a step-by-step framework for applying them to your unique situation. This isn't theoretical. These are the exact methods I've used to help hundreds of clients transform their financial trajectories, often achieving in months what previously seemed like distant years away goals. If today's message resonated deeply, subscribe right now, because what comes next will challenge you even further. In the coming videos, we'll move beyond the conceptual foundation and into tactical application, giving you the specific tools to identify and exploit the leverage points most relevant to your wealth creation journey. The choice is simple. You can continue pushing boulders uphill, or you can develop the perception to see the levers hiding in plain sight. Your first $1 million isn't primarily a question of how hard you work. It's a question of where you apply the force. I'll see you soon on the next step of this journey.